They were out early one morning, panning in the stream for gold, surrounded by the rising mountains. Old prospector with a tale for two, he brushed around in the pan, pointing out what lay within was ordinary sand. He began with a story about 20 years before, and a younger man who sought his fortune. With a tear or two he told of searching for his treasure, but making known the gold he sought was ordinary pleasure. There were years of doing without, and there were years of plenty. He started thinking that life was never steady, excepting when the bills came in and he had no money to pay. Whiskey had never tasted better ordinarily. He concluded his story as it filled the air with a laugh, saying how he found the Lord and Savior, and how he found the river of life by which his day unfolds, and pointing out what stands within is not ordinary gold, and pointing out what stands within is not ordinary gold. Trust in God, believe upon His promises. Through His word we can see His wonders, signs and miracles of His love. Return His love with devotion, standing on His word before all men. We are His beloved and His chosen, walking in this life renewed with peace. Trust in God, believe upon His promises. promises. Through His Word we can see His wonders, signs and miracles of His love. We can return His love with devotion, standing on His word before all men. We are His beloved and His chosen, walking in this life renewed with peace. Trust in God, believe upon His promises. Trust in God, believe upon His promises. Believe upon His promises.
All right, welcome. I'm Mark Wallace. This is True North Studio, and the topic today is the primal side of prayer. Today we're going to take prayer down a few notches. We peel prayer down to its base level. We strip all the paint off. No cosmetics, no fluff, no socially acceptable. Today we find our primal side of prayer. We're going to see how Jesus taught His disciples that at times they need to regress to their baser levels in their prayer style. Sometimes we need to go full-on caveman to get what we want. Even in prayer, we may need to go primal. The style of prayer we're going to learn about today is different than your mother's prayer circle. This is not your pastor's online prayer and supplication site. It doesn't come with a printed prayer list and digital time slots. This is not your average prayer warrior who fights for you from her couch. When things go wrong, we all like to have people we can depend on at our side, and sometimes we do. But most of the time, we need to wade into our toughest fights alone. Most of the time, it's just you and God. Now I ask you, what lengths are you willing to go to get your prayers answered? Better yet, what lengths does God expect you to go to get your prayers answered? You may be surprised. The type of prayer I'll discuss today will embarrass your family, will make your friends uncomfortable, and might get you kicked out of church, but it will get you results. Today we'll look at the forgotten, unwashed, red-headed stepchild style of prayer. If a caveman prayed, this is how she or he would have done it. Today we'll find out how Jesus and his cousin John taught their disciples to pray and how they got insane results. It's a bit different. When our friends are on their sofas with hands folded and eyes closed, lifting things to the Father, we step into the arena. We parachute into the wild with adrenaline surging, eyes open, senses peaked. We embrace our fight or flight signals. We know that sometimes the cavalry isn't coming. Let's grind through 3 examples and see how Jesus taught his disciples to unleash the primal side of prayer. First, the widow versus the judge. This is a lesson in persistence. The first primal prayer lesson shows us how to wear down our opponent or whatever opposes our prayer through brutal determination. Now we all know that God has already supplied all our need. Philippians 4:19 tells us that, but now we fight for it. Before we get into this record on this determined style of prayer, have you ever heard of persistence hunting? And this is to show a prayer attitude. A few years ago, I was deep in the Michigan woods and I heard the dry brush rustle. And then a deer limped into the clearing, tongue hanging out, and it ran wobbly-kneed up to me and fell down just a few yards in front of me. You know, I thought, what the? Moments later, a big black dog ran up and just sat staring at me, almost smiling. Until that day, I had never seen a dog run down a deer. The dog just stays after the deer until the deer drops from exhaustion. Did you know that humans used to hunt this way too? Way back in the 1880s, John Muir wrote, quote, "In winter, after the first snow, we frequently saw 3 or 4 Indians hunting deer in company, running like hounds on the fresh, exciting tracks. The escape of the deer from these noiseless, tireless hunters was said to be well nigh impossible," end of quote. In his best-selling book, Born to Run, Chris McDougall wrote, one person, quote, "One person swore when he saw the Tarahumara Indian catch a deer with his bare hands, chasing the bounding animal until it finally dropped dead from exhaustion," end of quote. Even today, the Kalahari Bushmen of southern Africa still successfully participate in endurance hunts without weapons. Why do I tell you this? Because we think there's no way a human can chase down a deer, but they can through sheer persistence. Humans made it this far because of persistence and endurance. It's baked into our DNA. The same principle works for getting our prayers answered. Let's look at one of Jesus' parables where he teaches us how to pray by never ever giving up on our prayers. Jesus uses this parable as a fictitious story used to illustrate a spiritual point. Jesus' first example shows prayer going primal. Luke 18, 1-8. "And he spake a parable unto them to this end, that men ought always to pray and to not faint." Now we all know prayer is necessary, but did you know that it's just as necessary to take an unrelenting part in our own prayer process? And that's what it means to not faint. Verse 2, saying, "There was in a city a judge, which feared not God, neither regarded man." This was probably a typical Roman judge who didn't want to be in Israel. You know, he hated the people and their Hebrew God. He was just putting in his time and doing as little as possible until his assignment was up. Verse 3, "And there was a widow in that city, and she came unto him, saying, Avenge me of mine adversary." Now, most disputes were handled by the religious or local tribal leaders. Only a civil case that affects the Romans or their reputation was dealt with in Roman court. A typical Hebrew widow was as close to being homeless as one could get. They were usually powerless and penniless. The judge didn't want this case. There was nothing in it for him. Verse 4, "And he would not for a while." He wouldn't help her for a while. "But afterward he said within himself, Though I fear not God, nor regard man, yet because this widow troubleth me, I will avenge her, lest by her continual coming she weary me." Well, Jesus is painting a magnificent word picture for his disciples. This imaginary judge hated God and hated people. This woman was coming at the judge so hard and so often and with such good logic that he knew she was beginning to wear him down. Now I love how he told himself that she was beginning to weary him. She was beginning to weary him. The word weary in Greek literally means to punch under the eye. To punch under the eye. He decided to take her case for no other reason than to get her to go away. She was painfully persistent. The unjust judge is saying that this scrappy little widow was relentless, a street fighter, a brunette brawler. She sort of scared him. Verse 6, "And the Lord said, Hear what the unjust judge saith, and shall God not avenge his own elect, which cry day and night unto him, though he bear long with them? I tell you that he will avenge them speedily." He will avenge them speedily. Well, nevertheless, when the Son of Man cometh, shall he find faith on earth? That's the last part of the verse. When the Son of Man cometh, shall he find faith on the earth? Well, Jesus wonders if he will ever find that kind of faith on this earth. Now, what I'm mentioning is what was expressed by that woman. She just kept going after the judge, going after the judge, going after the judge, kept going back and back and back and back and back. And eventually he gave in to her. She wore him down. Jesus is calling that faith. Faith is stubborn, persistent, untiring, restless belief. God is saying that if we pray and do our best to help answer our own prayers, we will help track down our deliverance. Never ever give up on your prayers. Fight for what is right and do whatever it takes to help God answer your prayers. That is persistence praying. Now the second one, friend versus friend. This is Jesus' family prayer secret. Now here's our second example of Jesus teaching his disciples to pray. This one takes persistence prayer hunting to a whole new level. This next prayer example can be used in business, in sports, and even in dating. How do you think I got Josephine? I remember praying for the right girl, but now I had to find her. But I sort of took an interest, a liking unto Josephine, so I drove down to her place in Hoboken, New Jersey to see her late one evening. And when she buzzed me up to her apartment, there were 5 other young men sitting there twiddling their thumbs. So much for having her all to myself. Well, I knew these guys were all crushing on her. They had it bad. I noticed her exasperated expression. So I grabbed their coats, walked them all out to the bus stop, circled the building, and to her dismay, I walked right back up, and we were married 4 weeks later. I was sort of kind of persistent. Hey, what are you going to do? It was New Jersey. Remember, prayer is not for God. It's for you. God already knows exactly what we need before we ask. Matthew 6:8 says that. This next record is a little trick that will take our prayer life to a whole new level. Jesus will teach us his family prayer secret. This style of prayer, followed by action, saved Jesus' great-grandma Ruth from a life of poverty. It gave Jesus' ancestor, great-great-granddaddy David, the strength he needed to take down Goliath. That active prayer style helped King Solomon prosper everyone in his entire country. Luke 11:1. And it came to pass that as he was praying in a certain place, when he ceased, one of his disciples said unto him, Lord, teach us to pray as John also taught his disciples. Well, I love how one of his disciples, unnamed, challenged Jesus to teach them how to pray the way he prayed and the way John the Baptist taught his disciples to pray. The disciples must have noticed a difference in Jesus and John's prayer style, or maybe his results, or both. Jesus' prayer style was different from the way they were taught to pray in the synagogue. Now, I need to point out that every time Jesus uses the words, and he said unto them, he is teaching a separate lesson in this prayer exercise. Here is part 1, verse 2. And he said unto them, when ye pray, say, Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Well, every time I hear a group of people saying that Lord's Prayer in unison, it's hard for me not to think back on the days of taking a knee in the end zone, helmet in hand, before every single Texas high school football game. What's funny is the other team was on the other end of the field doing the same thing at exactly the same time. My red-headed brain couldn't help but glance at them and wonder which team God would listen to tonight. By the time I was 17, I realized this was not the Lord's Prayer. It was the pre-game warm-up to prayer. First off, he was trying to teach the necessary mindset before we step into our prayer arena. The Lord's Prayer is our warm-up routine. Let's summarize. First, we remember that God is our Father. Next, we picture that God is both in heaven and with us on earth at the same time. After that, we visualize God opening the windows of heaven for just us to supply our basic workaday needs here on earth. And finally, we remember that forgiveness is good for the soul and that God will deliver us. The Lord's Prayer is our pre-game primal prayer workup or warm-up. The cousins, John the Baptist and Jesus, went at life differently. But on this one point, they totally agreed. They both knew exactly how to unlock their prayers. Now Jesus goes into phase 2 of the prayer game. This is our part of the prayer process. This is game time. Now notice again the words that start an additional point about prayer. Verse 5, and he said unto them, again, he said unto them, which of you shall have a friend and shall go unto him at midnight and say unto him, Friend, lend me 3 loaves. For a friend of mine on his journey has come to me, and I have nothing to set before him. And he said from within, and he from within is going to answer and say, Trouble me not! The door is now shut, and my children are with me in bed. I cannot rise and give thee. Well, I say to you, verse 8, though he will not rise and give him because he is his friend, yet because of his importunity, he will rise and give him as many as he needeth. The word importunity means overly persistent asking. Jesus is telling us to be bold, to be brassy, and just a little bit sassy. Like the widow woman wearing down the judge in the first example, here you're waking up a friend and wearing him down until you get what you need, so you can help somebody else. And there's the difference in 1 and 2. I remember when I was a kid living in Japan, our family went on a tour through a colorful Japanese temple. And we all took our shoes off, and in our socks, we followed our guide into this temple single file. And she stopped at one point, grabbed this thick, heavy braided rope and tugged. And a huge, thick bronze bell rang once. Boom! You could feel it. I asked her why she rang the bell, and she said, to wake up the gods. Well, I'm glad we never need to wake up our God, but we do need to wake up ourselves. So pull the cord. Wake up this sleepy world and get what you came for. The Lord's Prayer is our pre-game prayer warm-up, but this overly persistent, demanding, insistent example is our practical. This is our part in the prayer process. Remember, prayer has a hard work element to it. We call it active believing. A healthy prayer life should be kind of exhausting for both you and your opponent. We always have an opponent. You always have an opponent. Prayer takes 2. It always takes you and God. God wants you to bug him until you are finally ready to get out the door and put in the work. You pray to God and both of you go to work. Verse 9 and 10 are Coach Jesus telling us to get out there and win. Think pregame locker room speech. Now here's our third primal prayer point. Verse 9, and I say unto you, ask and it shall be given you. Seek and ye shall find. Knock and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened. If you want to win in your prayer life, keep asking and it shall be given to you. Keep seeking and you will actually find what you were looking for. And when you find the right door, keep knocking and the door will open for you. Anyone who prays and follows up that prayer with insane amounts of action will see the windows of heaven open up to them. I think the guy who asked Jesus to teach him how to pray, like his family prayed, got more than he bargained for. If you're going to take the time to pray, to minister, or to get a need supplied, be ready to put in an embarrassing amount of work. You have to help God to answer your prayer. Now, woman versus Christ. Woman versus Christ. This is fearless persistence. Now, the first 2 amazing prayer boosters were parables, and they were brilliant teachings. They were examples, from the mind of Jesus. But this next one is for reals. You can't make this stuff up. Finally, we're going to hit a record that is almost too shocking to comprehend. This is a lesson to remember when you feel like an outsider, powerless, like you don't fit with man or God. Imagine getting rejected by the Christ and you keep coming back. Matthew 15:21. Then Jesus went thence and departed into the coast of Tyre and Sidon. Well, Tyre and Sidon are cities in what was then the very northern tip of Israel, in a beautiful area near the Mediterranean Sea. Now it's called Lebanon. And behold, a woman of Canaan came out of the same coast and cried unto him, saying, Have mercy on me, O Lord, thou son of David. My daughter is grievously vexed with a devil. While Jesus and his team were out speaking the word, healing people, and doing good, a woman started following them around town, begging for Jesus to help her. This woman was an unbeliever, or so they thought. The same record in Mark chapter 7:26, similar record, calls her a woman of Canaan, and a Greek, and a Syrophoenician. So those are adjectives or descriptors to tell you about this woman. She was a woman of Canaan, she was a Greek, and she was Syrophoenician, which means she was of mixed race, she was of another religion, and she was not from Israel. So she looked different, she dressed different, she behaved differently, and she had a funny accent. She knew she knew that she was an outsider and that she probably didn't fit with Jesus and his posse, but that was not going to stop her from trying to get some help for her daughter. Now, obviously, nothing else she had tried had worked up to this point. The fact that even she knew her daughter was vexed with a devil must have been so obvious it didn't take discerning of spirits. The girl was flat out crazy, folks. She knew Jesus was her last resort to help her daughter. Watch what happens. Verse 23, but he answered her not a word. Imagine Jesus totally ignoring you like you didn't even exist. Have you ever felt like that? Have you ever felt that alone in your life? It's like taking your Android phone into an Apple store to get it fixed. Good luck with that. Have you ever felt like an outsider because of something you did in the past? Or because of your clothing, your accent, or worse, because of the family you were born into? Do you feel slighted because your family raised you a bit differently than other people you know? It's a confusing place to live. Mark 7:26 adds, and she besought him or grilled him that he would cast forth the devil out of her daughter. This mixed race, pagan, unbeliever woman besought him, grilled him, interrogated Jesus. She is pushing hard, asking the Christ some blunt questions. So, they say you're the healer, the Savior of the world. Why don't you please help me too? I see you helping hundreds of other people. I see healings and miracles. All I want is a moment of your time. My daughter needs your help. Help. This is not those screaming street kids that surround you in third world countries. This is not the professional beggars we see at rush hour traffic lights. This is the voice of desperate persistence. This is like a mom in a war-torn country as the U.S. tanks rumble past, desperately trying to get the GI's attention and get some food for her starving kids. We've all seen those World War II movies. But even today, we see things like that happening in war-torn countries. We see the war-torn poverty. Verse 23 continues, and his disciples came and besought him, saying, Send her away, for she crieth after us. Well, I think, they heard her crying for Jesus. Now she's going after them, and they don't like that. Tell her to shut up, Master. First, she's ignored. She's just flat out ignored by Jesus. And then she turns to the disciples and they ask Jesus to get rid of her. She isn't fazed. She isn't fazed. How hard would that be? Jesus' disciples tried to get her to leave, and she just wouldn't leave. This mom was annoying. She was loud. She was brassy, and she was attracting attention. The words, quote, "she crieth after us," is the Greek word krazo, which is, it doesn't mean crazy, okay, which is a word that imitates the loud, harsh, throaty, grating, obnoxious screech of a raven. Krazo. You see, you've heard them all in your yard, haven't you? There's the crows and the ravens. This lady yelled so loud to get Jesus' attention that her voice had gone hoarse and was cracking. "Jesus, please help me! Please notice me! Please!" No wonder they were sick of her. No wonder. In my younger days, I was part of a young and growing ministry. I was taking some advanced level training at one of their campuses. After a live teaching by the founder of that group, I wanted to meet the guy. I found him sitting under a shade tree surrounded by 20 or so people. I pushed my way through the crowd to shake his hand, but before I got to him, I was literally picked up into the air by two of his goons, and they carried me to the edge of the campus, and they set me down rather harshly and told me in no uncertain terms, "Leave and don't come back." Now, it seems a bit harsh when all I wanted was a handshake. You know, why did they reject me? Why didn't this guy let me in? Well, you know, these guys really didn't know me because I just walked around the block and walked right back onto the campus and finished the last week of the class. Easy peasy. I got to meet the guy later. Verse 24. But he, Jesus, answered and said, "I am not sent unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel." You know, I got to read that again. "I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel." So Jesus is telling this woman that I'm only here to help Israel, not you. You know, it was true that he was sent to heal and gather the children of Israel who had lost their way. Everyone knew that, but she didn't accept it. She didn't accept it. She was first ignored by Jesus himself. Then she was asked to leave by the disciples. I don't know if she was carried out to the edge. You see, now she's told that she's not part of the club, that she doesn't belong. She's not invited to the party. Now, how would you feel? How would you feel if Jesus told you, "I don't want to deal with you"? Now, as harsh as it seems, Jesus was telling the truth. She did not belong. She knew it, but you know something? She didn't care. Ever felt that way? Ever felt like an outsider? On a trip to Josephine's family in Italy, I went to a local supermarket to buy more hummus for the kids. And for some reason, I couldn't locate it in the store, so I asked a shelf stalker where I could find the hummus. And he tilted his head and said, "Hummus? Hummus?" And he had his hands up and his eyebrows making that "I don't get it" gesture, you know, like the Italians do. Hummus? Well, I asked for a manager who spoke English because this guy wasn't any help. Well, a guy who looked just like him came out and said in English, "What is hummus?" And I said, It's a dip to eat with crackers." And I made the international dipping of chips in hummus gesture. And while I said hummus, and he finally got it, and he said, "Oh, you mean hummus." Now, I think he knew exactly what I meant. He was just jerking me around because I was an outsider. But hey, forget about it. We were in Italy. Well, this desperate mother who only wanted help for her sick daughter assumed that God was big enough for everyone, of every faith, even if his disciples didn't yet understand. Mark 7:24 says that Jesus was then ushered into a safe house to protect him from people and from her. But you know something? She found him. She found him. You're not supposed to be able to find somebody in a safe house, but she found Jesus. Now, Matthew 15:25, then came she and worshiped him, saying, Lord, help me. Now, how many rejections do most people take? Somehow she crashed the gates, got past security, which would have been the apostles, and burst into the room Jesus was in and threw herself on the floor at his feet. Very dramatic. And that took a bit of balls on her part. Now, this mixed race Gentile unbeliever looked Jesus in the eye and begged him, Lord, help me, help my daughter, help me with my daughter. Her voice was almost gone now, but her heart was on fire. 26, but he answered and said, it is not meet to take the children's bread and to cast it to dogs. Did Jesus just call her a dog? I think he did. Imagine, do you guys think of Jesus like this? You know, once again, the Christ blows her off, this time to her face. Most people would have quit by now, but not her. You're going to see that she keeps the dialogue going. This woman's smart. She's aggressive, and she won't quit until her daughter is healed. She won't quit until her daughter is healed. Being called a dog was more of a cut in the first century than it is now. It meant you were an unwelcome, filthy scavenger. Today, being called a dog is a term of endearment, especially if you're a rapper or a Cleveland Browns fan. Woof, woof. You know, a full-grown dog was rejected by everyone in Israel, yet dogs still wanted to hang around people. Somehow dogs want to be around people even if people don't want them around. You got to know, dogs were not pets in Israel. Grown dogs in Israel ran in packs and would eat just about anything. 1 Kings 21, verse 23 says, the dog shall eat Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. Him that dieth of Ahab in the city, dogs shall eat. Okay, that means dogs will eat corpses. Okay, dogs will eat pretty much anything, especially meat. A pack of feral dogs can be a bit scary. I don't know if you've ever seen one. When I was in forestry school in East Texas at Stephen F. Austin State University, we had a pack of dogs that lived in the forest right next to us. And they would visit our campus looking for food and trouble. And the loudspeakers would blare telling us, beware of feral dogs, stay inside. Repeat, stay inside. Now, you know, pack dogs have a prey drive that sometimes motivates them to attack regardless if they're hungry or not. So they're dangerous. Well, that was all through Israel at that time. That's what dogs were. They were dangerous scavengers. Now I'm going to throw you a curveball. I'm going to throw you a curveball here. The word dogs in this verse is actually the word puppies. Jesus actually called this lady a pup. Now, at that time in Israel, parents would sometimes allow children to play with and feed the puppies of these otherwise nasty dogs. That's maybe why they like to keep hanging around later on, okay? But when the pups grew up, they were never again allowed in the house, ever, ever. Remember, an adult dog was not a pet. It was a scavenger that lived in the streets. But they would allow the puppies to come in so the kids could play with them. And because everybody likes a puppy, right? You know, they ran the streets in packs. These dogs would run the streets in packs looking for meat scraps in the garbage piles. But Jesus was calling this woman a pup. It's still sort of a cut, but it's not quite as bad as being called like a dirty, nasty dog. You know, Jesus had just called this lady a dog, but a small, cute little dog. Now this pagan woman flips the example against Jesus to strengthen her case. I love how she does not quit. And you're going to see how Jesus loved it too. Verse 27, and she said, remember he just called her, you know, that I don't, you know, we don't feed the dogs, you know, but they may eat the scraps that fall down from the table. And she said, truth, Lord. Remember, she broke into this house, right? She's where she should not be. Yeah. The apostles are probably standing outside the room waiting to see what Jesus is doing. Okay, and this lady's at his feet, and she said, truth, Lord. Yet the dogs or puppies eat from the crumbs which fall from their master's table. Mark 7:28 tells us that these puppy masters were the children. Now she calls herself a puppy eating the kids' scraps. Now I love the verbal interaction between her and Jesus and their brilliant use of analogy, each building on what the other's narrative. Jesus was enjoying this exchange and also knew she was desperate for help. As emotional and rejected and victimized as she may have felt at that moment, her mission to help her demented daughter outweighed her feelings. That's the attitude of asking we need in prayer. We pray, and then we hit the streets looking for answers to that prayer. Prayer typically requires action to find your answer. Verse 28, then Jesus answered and said unto her, O woman, great is thy faith. Be it unto thee even as thou wilt. And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. And she wasn't even there. Jesus now calls this amazing lady the endearing term woman. He saw beneath her looks and race and culture and religion. He noticed the one thing that separates the haves from the have-nots. He pointed out the single thing it takes for any of us to get prayers answered, and that is faith, believing, or conviction. Some call it grit. To have the ability to maintain focus on your goal, to take a beating but keep on competing is the lesson here. You pray, you keep a cool head, and you go for it no matter what. The answer is out there no matter what. Grit or faith or believing action is the formula to success in anything, even prayers. Always remember that you too will have to put out massive amounts of energy to play part in the prayer process, whether it's for you or it's a prayer for someone else's deliverance. Now, wrapping things up, what have we really learned today? What do we do with this information? Sure, we saw 3 prayer examples with 3 similar outcomes, and they made us feel all good on the inside. But did they change our attitude on how Jesus taught his disciples to follow up their prayers? Not a one of those records suggested that we just pray and patiently wait on God for an answer. All of them expect us to supplement our prayers with insane amounts of energy toward our goal. I call this going primal. We don't wait for our meal to come to us. We go after it like a hungry caveman taking down a woolly mammoth. That's Jesus' prayer style. First, we saw a poor widow wearing down a reluctant Roman judge, until he finally caved and helped her. She did it with sheer hard-hitting persistence. We don't stop fighting until we get what we came for. Next, we saw a man wake up the neighborhood with his importunity, with his overly persistent asking, until he got what he needed so he could help somebody else. We keep pushing. We keep ministering. We aggressively pursue what we were put on earth to do. And finally, like the mixed-race mom with a suffering child, we must be willing to aggressively break through our cultural barriers while maintaining focus without frustration. We must be willing to handle any and all rejection with a cool head. We persist until success. Nobody puts our prayer baby in the corner. We run toward our Goliath. We go full-on primal. Sometimes we just need to go caveman crazy. We do our part in getting our own prayers answered. We all know that God has already supplied our need. We also know that we are each expected to aggressively follow up our prayers with action, no matter who tries to stop us, no matter where we came from, no matter how long it takes. I think what we saw today is that sometimes in order to track down an answer to our prayers, it will take a freakish amount of energy and an ungodly amount of persistence. How far are you really willing to go to get your prayers answered? Are you willing to go primal? Are you willing to go primal? Hey, it's tough out there, folks. You know that. Society will try to shut you down. Friends will try to stop you. Sometimes it will even seem like God is ignoring you, but He's not. He supplies, and we go get it. Jesus and his cousin John the Baptist taught their disciples that a prayer without action doesn't have a prayer. Today is the day, folks. Now is the time to take it to the next step. Let's get out there and unleash our primal prayers. You are awesome. God bless you all.